Welcome back to another crochet tutorial with Cozy Rosie UK, and today I am sharing with you each of the stitch patterns for the In the Mood crochet blanket that's worked in rows. The stitches that you'll work in your In the Mood blanket are determined by the moods and emotions you've tracked during the previous 7 days using the In the Mood tracker. If you haven't already started tracking your moods, you can find a link in the description box to download your very own In the Mood tracker. This video is broken down into 8 different sections, and you can find the different sections time-stamped below in the description box as well, and you'll be able to pick which stitches you need to make based on the overall mood of the week. There are just 3 rows that you'll work each week, determined by that mood or overall emotion you felt in the previous 7 days. The blanket is designed to be a finished size of 36 inches by 54 inches, and that is using a size 3 or DK weight yarn. If you want to make your blanket a little bit bigger, you can simply increase the yarn weight that you're using to an Aran or a worsted weight and adjust the crochet hook as recommended by the yarn. As I've mentioned, I'm going to be using a DK weight yarn, which is a size 3 yarn, and I'm using Paint Box Yarns Simply DK. The shade that I'm using is shade number 108, which is light caramel. And this is 100% acrylic yarn, and it's quite a large meterage or yardage on this ball. You get 276 meters, which is roughly 302 yards, and this will do probably about 4 or 5 weeks of your blanket just in this one ball. The estimated total amount of yarn that you're going to need to finish your 36 inch by 54 inch blanket will be about 8 to 10 balls of this yarn. I bought a pack of 10 just to be extra safe, and I've popped a link in the description box for the colour and the yarn weight that I've used. I'm using the recommended hook size for this yarn, which is a 4mm hook. Of course, I've got a darning needle. We're not going to need that for a whole 52 weeks, and we're not going to need any scissors either, because we should be working a whole ball and just leaving it attached in between working that blanket. Before you go on and make your first row of your special stitches, we're going to work a foundation row of stitches to work into. You only have to do this once for your whole blanket, and that's right at the very beginning. So even if you haven't tracked any of your moods yet, you can make your foundation chain and that first row of stitches ready to add in your special stitches once you've tracked your moods for 7 days. While I place my slip knot onto my hook, I'm just going to let you know about how you can adjust the size of your blanket. So the stitch count is a multiple of 12 plus 1 stitch, and then you need to do 1 extra chain for your foundation chain as well. So the example, of course, is 145. We had a starting chain of 146. We take that extra one off, which leaves us with 145, which is divisible by 12. So for our foundation chain, we're going to make a total chain of 146. So with your slip knot on your hook, we're going to yarn over and pull through. We're going to do that for 146 times. So go ahead and make your chain, and I'll meet you back to work your first foundation row. I've just finished my beginning chain of 146 chains, and it looks really long. It's not as long as it looks once we've worked that first row into it, but it is. If you would like to adjust, your starting chain, that will create more width to your blanket. So as long as your starting chain is divisible by 12, and then add on 1 extra chain for the foundation and then 1 extra chain for your chain, the stitch pattern will work for all the different emotion rows that we have. So once you've got your beginning chain, we're going to start by working 1 US single crochet into the second chain from hook. So this loop on our hook does not count. Here's my first chain that we cannot work into, and this is the second, and it's up to you whether you just go underneath that top loop of your beginning chain, or if you flip it over and work into the back loop of your foundation chain. Underneath that top loop of your chain, working 1 US single crochet into each chain along. By working into that second chain from hook, you should end with a total of 145 single crochets at the end of your foundation row. So continue across, working 1 single crochet into each chain across, and I will meet you once you've finished your foundation row. So at the end of working your foundation row, you should have 145 stitches, and that's the only time we're going to work this row is right now, because now we are ready to start on working one of the 7 different mood stitches. Now you can find the timestamps for each of the individual mood stitches in the description box below. If you're watching on a computer, it might be on the right hand side there for you, and you just need to pick the mood and it will show you which stitch you'll be working. Each week you'll be working a different emotion, unless you're doing it once a day. It's entirely up to you how you work this project. I'm doing 1 mood a week, so that over the course of 12 months there'll be 52 different rows. And then there'll be a separate video released to create a beautiful border for the end of your blanket. Each section of the pattern has 3 different rows to work, so each week all you need to work are 3 different rows. So go ahead and look at the description box and find that first section to work, and I'll meet you there to work the first mood into our blanket. This section of 3 rows is for happy moods. If you've had a lovely happy week or day, you're going to work the following 3 rows onto your In the Mood blanket. Whether you've just worked your foundation row or you're adding this on to a different part of the pattern, you just need to carry on with row 1 to 3 of the happy mood. The special stitch for the happy moods is the puff stitch, one of my absolute favourites. Let's get started with those 3 happy rows. For row 1, we're going to start by making a chain of 1 and turning our work. Now this chain 1 does not count as a stitch, and we're simply going to work US half double crochet into each stitch along. So we're yarning over and working into the same stitch as our chain 1 because it does not count. So we yarn over, insert, yarn over to bring a loop up, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And we're just going to work 1 US half double crochet, the same as a UK half treble crochet, into each stitch along. So our stitch count will remain the same. At the end of row 1 of the happy rows, we will have 145 half double crochets. So continue along, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch across, and I'll meet you at the end of row 1 of our happy rows. So at the end of row 1 of the happy rows, you should still have a stitch count of 145. It's just that this time has been our half double crochets. Going into row 2 of our happy rows, we are going to make a chain of 4. So we yarn over and pull through 4 times. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. So you've got 1, 2, 3. Those chains count as your double crochet, and the extra chain 1 counts as a chain 1 space. Now because that chain 4 does count, it means we're not going to work into the stitch underneath our chain, and then we're going to skip the next as well. So we're almost working into that 3rd stitch along. So that counts as our first stitch. We skip 1 and we're working into this one. And this row we're working our puff stitches. So we're going to yarn over our hook. That one's worked into, we're skipping that one and we're going into the next stitch. And with the puff stitch, we're going to yarn over, bring our loop back through, and then we are going to yarn over and reinsert, bringing up another loop for a total of 5 times. So this was number 1. We're yarning over and reinserting for number 2, yarn over, reinsert for number 3, bring that next loop up, yarn over again for number 4, bring up that loop, and then finally for number 5 we insert, bring up a loop, and you're going to have a lot of loops on your hook. You should have 1, oops, that's our actual loop, so let me make that a little bit tighter. So you should have, oh, I can't see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, oh, you should have 11, I know that much, but I can't actually see them all there. But it looks like quite a lot, and it is quite a puffy puff stitch. So we're going to yarn over and pull through all the loops on our hook. Kind of just get it through the first lot first and then through that other loop. And then we close that puff stitch with a chain 1. And then we have our pretty little puff stitch. Now this chain 1 that we have made to close our puff stitch does not count as a chain 1. So we're going to make an additional chain 1, which is the one we make to skip over the next stitch. So it almost looks like we've got a chain of 2, but the first chain 1 does not count. From here, we're going to skip the next stitch, and I've yarned over ready to work into the next along. So we skip 1, insert into the next, and we're working a double crochet into this stitch. We're then going to make a chain of 1, skip the next, ready to work a puff stitch into the next. So remembering that our puff stitch is a yarn over, bring a loop up 5 times. So we yarn over, insert, bring that loop up. That's number 1. And I really do make a point of bringing that loop up before yarning over again, reinserting for number 2, reinsert for number 3, 4, and 5. To really help get that hook through, you can pinch at the bottom of I'm kind of pinching at the bottom of those loops, and it just helps bring that hook through all those stitches. And then we close with that chain 1, and we're working a chain 1 after that, just to help keep our stitches spaced out appropriately. Without that additional chain 1, it kind of tilts your double crochet in the wrong direction. So repeating this all the way across. So we skip the next, working a double crochet into the next. We chain 1, skip the next, ready to work a puff stitch into the next. So we yarn over and bring a loop up 5 times. This is number 5 for me. Pulling down to bring it through. We close with a chain 1, and then we make a chain 1. So we're doing 2 chain 1s once we've pulled through all those loops. And we're just going to repeat this all the way across our row. So it's a really beautiful double-sided stitch. I do like the puff stitch for that reason, because it can be seen on both sides. And we're going to repeat this all the way across to the end of our row. We're going to finish on that double crochet. So we're going to skip the next, working a double crochet into the next, chain 1, skip the next, ready to work, yarn over, insert, bring a loop up 5 times for our puff stitch. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pull through, we chain 1 and chain 1. We chain 1 to close, and then chain 1 to skip the next, ready to repeat it again. You should end on a double crochet into, wherever that is, all the way over here, into your last stitch, and that's where I'm going to meet you at the end of row 2 of your happy rows. I'm just working my final double crochet into the top of that final stitch of that second row of the happy rows. And you should be looking a little bit like this, where you've got those puff stitches alternating with those double crochets. Hopefully I have not made any errors, but you just never know. It looks good to me. So at the end of row 2, you should have a total of 36 puff stitches and 37 double crochets, and in between them altogether you will have 72 chain 1 spaces. So going into row 3, we begin with a chain of 1, and then we are turning our work, and we are simply going to work 1 half double crochet into the same as our chain 1, because it does not count as a stitch. And then we're going to work a half double crochet into that chain 1 space in between those stitches. We're then going to work into the top of that puff stitch, just whack it right into that hole there, working your next half double crochet before working into that chain 1 space. We then work into the top of the double crochet from the previous row with another half double, and then we're working back into that chain 1 space again, into that nice easy spot right into the top of our puff stitch, then into that chain 1 space once again. So we're basically working into each chain one space, into the top of a puff, into the chain one space, into the top of your double crochet, and that will just repeat that all the way across this row till you reach the end of your row. So we're working to the top of the double crochet, into the chain one space, into the top of that puff stitch, and then into the next chain one space across, and we're repeating that the whole way down. So continue across to the last 4 stitches and I'll meet you there to finish off our final row of the happy rows. So I have just a few stitches remaining. I've worked into that chain one space. I'm going to work into the top of my popcorn, top of my puff stitch, and then of course we need to work into that chain one space we created all the way back at the beginning of row 2, and then to finish we're going to work into the top of our 3rd chain that we made. 1, 2, 3. So the 3rd chain out of the 4 that we made. And it's up to you which part of the chain you go through. I just like to make sure I pick up 2 loops of the chain to work into. So at the end of the 3rd row of the happy rows, you still have a stitch count of 145, and there'll be half double crochets. Double check your stitch count before you go in, before you put your project to one side for the week, and continue tracking your moods ready to work your next section once you've tracked the next 7 days. This section is to show you how to work the angry rows. So if you've had a bit of an angry week, I hope you haven't had too many of these weeks in your year, but it does happen. So regardless of which pattern rows you've worked before, or if you're working into your foundation row, this pattern will work directly onto them. So for row 1 of our angry rows, we're going to begin with a chain of 3. So we yarn over and pull through 3 times, and that gives us a chain of 3, which counts as our first double crochet, a US double crochet in this row. So we're not going to work into that first stitch underneath our chain. Instead, we are starting in the 2nd stitch. Now for the angry stitches, we're making front post followed by a back post double crochet. So you'll be able to work around the post of the stitch from your previous row, regardless of what that was, and that's what we're going to do. In this case, I've just worked the happy rows, so I have a row of half double crochets below that we're going to work our post stitches around for row 1. We've done our chain 3 that counts as our first stitch, so we don't work around the post underneath. Instead, we're going to be working around the post of the stitch below. So there's the stitch, and this is the post. Yarn over our hook, and we're going to be working a front post double crochet. So that means we insert the hook from the front and back out of the front around the post of the stitch below. So here's the stitch, and because it was a half double crochet, the stitch is just to the side of it. If I was working around a double crochet, as we will do in the next row, it will be almost to the other side of it. So we're yarning over the hook, we're inserting the hook around the post, which in this case is just here, going in from the front and back out of the front. We're going to yarn over, bring our hook back around that post, so we have 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops, yarn over and pull through the next 2. This pulls the post of the stitch in the previous row slightly towards us. Once we've worked our front post double crochet, we're going to work a back post double crochet around the next post in the previous row. So we yarn over the hook, and this time we're inserting our hook from the back of our fabric, so it comes out of the front, going around that post and back out the other side, so that our hook is on the back of our project. I'll show you that again because this one's a little bit more tricky. So we yarn over, come in, it's almost coming from the side of where we've just worked, but we're coming from the back, and there's the post, and we're going back through underneath to come back out. We yarn over, bring that back through. I have to wiggle it a little bit so I don't catch anything. We yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. We're then going to work around the front of the next post. So for the front, we come through the front around that post and back out, yarn over, bring that loop back through, pull through 2, pull through 2. We're then going to work around the back of the post. So once we've yarned over, we come from the back of the fabric, out at the side of that one we've just worked, out the back, around that post next to it, pull through 2 and pull through 2. See if we can see what's happening here. So we've done a front post, a back post, a front post and a back post, and it's kind of creating a raised texture on both sides of our crochet fabric. We're going to repeat this all the way across, working around the front post of the one stitch before working around the back of the post of the next stitch. When we do the front post, we're working through the front and out the front. And when we work the back post, we're coming from the back, out the back. I always fold my fabric, so I just pick up one post of my stitch. And then we go in. You see where you've worked that last one? We're going in the side for the front post again. And then around the back. We're almost coming out underneath that stitch and back out around that next post. You should be alternating, so it looks like you have one coming out and one going in, alternating all the way across your row. And as I said, I will meet you when you have just 2 stitches remaining, ready to work that last couple together and to go into row 2 of these angry rows. So I've worked all the way along, working one front post double, one back post double, and I've reached my last 2 stitches. If you're not on a back post double for your last 2 stitches, you may have gone awry somewhere. Have a look through to check that you have one front post, one back post all the way along. I will admit I've had to pull back a few stitches to find where my mistake was, and it is easily done. But row 2 of your angry rows is so much easier now you've set up your first row. So this last back post double crochet has worked for that last stitch there. We have 2 stitches remaining, so we're just working a final front post double crochet around that next stitch, and then we end with a normal double crochet worked into the top of that last stitch. So at the end of row 1, you should have your 2 double crochets. So you had that chain 3 all the way at the beginning, that counts as your first one. And then we've just worked our other double crochet here. And then you should have 72 front post double crochets. So you can count just the front ones. And you should have 71 back post double crochets as well. Going into row 2 of our angry rows, we are going to start with a chain of 3 and turn our work. Once again, that chain 3 counts, so we're not working into the top of that first stitch. And for row 2, we're simply going to start by working a back post double crochet around that first stitch. Now you can see we actually ended with a front post, so when we turn, it becomes a back post stitch. So you can almost feel and how much easier it is to identify where you're working those stitches. So we're coming out the front, well, through the back, out the back, and then after your back post double crochet, this stitch is facing towards us, so we are working a front post double crochet. This row is going to feel 100 times quicker compared to your last one, and your stitches are almost telling you where you need to work. So we are working one back post double crochet followed by a front post double crochet, and you can tell that the next one is out the back, so we're going to work a back post. The front post is pushed towards us, so we're going to work a front post after that one. So that was a back post just facing towards us, so we're going to do a front post. So we're essentially repeating it, but because of the actual way the stitches are worked, we're reversing it. So we did our chain 3, started with a back post, front post, back post, front post. We're going to repeat that all the way back down And this time we're going to end on a back post double crochet. So I'll meet you for our last 2 stitches. There's your last front post, and that's where I will meet you for the end of row 2. So I've just reached my last few stitches in row 2, working a front post, and we should be finishing the stitch before the end of the row with a back post double crochet, and we're working a double crochet into the top of that 3rd chain that we started with. A little bit tricky to find. So there's 1, 2, 3. So that's where I need to be inserting my hook, working that final double crochet into the top of there, and that will maintain our overall stitch count. Now you'll see that that's folded in a little bit. Don't worry about that too much. And you may notice if you're doing this in a further on in your blanket that it pulls, these stitches pull your blanket in ever so slightly. Please don't worry, the edging will help straighten all of that out if you find your rows cinched in a little bit from these 3 rows of front post, back post. We still have the 3rd row to go, so we are going to start row 3 with a chain of 3, and we're simply repeating row 1 again with that chain 3 counting as our first double crochet, so we don't work into the first. Instead, we start with a front post double crochet followed by a back post double crochet. So a nice simple repeat of row 1, working 1 front post double crochet followed by a back post double crochet. Where is the end? All the way to the end. And then we should be finishing on that front post double crochet before working our final double crochet into the top of that chain 3. So work all the way along, working 1 front post double crochet followed by a back post double crochet all the way across, and I will meet you for those final 3 stitches once again at the end of row 3. So I have just 3 stitches remaining of this 3rd and final row. Oh. And this is the only thing that's making me angry right now, is that I keep slipping off. There we are. So we should finish with a front post double crochet followed by working into the top of that chain 3. 1, 2, 3, yeah, just checking I go into the right one. Working a double crochet into that last stitch. So you can see what I mean by how the stitches will be pulled in, but actually it's not a stitch counting error. It's just the nature of these front post, back post stitches, and that will be resolved when we work our edging. So at the end of row 3 of your angry rows, you are ready to go on to your next section of the In the Mood blanket. You should still have an overall stitch count of 145 stitches, including your beginning chain 3 from this row. So make sure you count that and double check before you walk away from your project. Make sure there aren't any errors for you to come back to when you're ready to work on your next lot of rows. This section shows you how to work the sad rows of the In the Mood crochet blanket, and the special stitch for this is the paired half double crochet. It's a bit of a magical stitch. It's a bit special in the fact that it is worked the same as a half double crochet 2 together, but it's worked so that it doesn't decrease the stitch. It will become clearer as we work it. So let's do row 1 of the sad rows. We begin with a chain of 1, which does not count as a stitch, which means we're going to work into the first stitch of our row. So we're going to yarn over, and into that first stitch we are working a half double crochet. So we yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through all 3. We're then going to work a paired half double crochet. Now normally the paired half double crochet is worked into the stitch you've just worked into and in the next, but we're going to be starting our paired half double in the next stitch. So we would yarn over, we're inserting our hook into our next stitch along, yarn over, bring a loop up. We then yarn over, insert our hook into the next again, yarn over, bring up a 5th loop. We're then going to yarn over and pull through all 5 loops. We're then going to work a paired half double crochet across the same and the next. So we yarn over, insert into that same stitch we've just worked into, yarn over, bring a loop up, yarn over, insert our hook into the next stitch, yarn over, bring our 5th loop up, yarn over, pull through all, and this time we're going to make a chain of 1. So what we've worked so far, in our first stitch we worked a half double crochet, we then began our first paired half double in the next 2, and we worked our second paired half double crochet into the same and next, and then we made a chain 1. So effectively, over these 3 stitches, we have 2 paired half double crochets and a chain 1. We're going to repeat this pattern of working a paired half double over the next 2 stitches, followed by a paired half double across the same and the next, finishing with a chain 1. Let's do a few more together. So we yarn over and we're working into the next, bring up that 3rd loop, insert into the next along, bring up the paired loop, bring up the loop to have those 5 loops on your hook, pull through all 5, and then we're working our paired half double across the same and the next. So we yarn over, insert, bring our loop up, yarn over, insert into the next stitch, bring our loop up, yarn over to pull through all 5 loops. I'm catching on something, and then we close with a chain 1, and once again we have 2 paired half doubles worked across 3 stitches and a chain 1. Let's do that again. I'm hoping this is making sense for you. So the first paired half double is worked across the next 2 stitches. So we yarn over, insert, and bring our loop up, yarn over, insert into the next, and bring our loop up. We yarn over, pull through all 5 loops, and then our next paired half double is worked into the same that we've just finished in and the next stitch. So we yarn over, insert into this one we've already worked into, yarn over, insert into the next stitch. So we have those 5 loops on our hook. We yarn over, pull through all 5 loops and chain 1. So this is a very lightly textured stitch, and it's creating a beautiful chain 1 space in between each of the pairs of the paired half doubles. We're going to repeat this all the way across. If I can find the end of my blanket. All the way across to our last 3 stitches. So 1, 2, 3. If you're working into the top of these stitches, it's a little bit more hard to see, but you need your last 3 stitches, and in that case that's a chain 3. So 1, 2 and 3. So continue to work across in that same manner, and I will meet you for the last 3 stitches. So I have finally reached the last 3 stitches because I've got a chain 3 and there's the last 3. I was questioning my sanity, but I'd made a mistake all the way back, pretty much at the beginning of this row. So if you're wondering if you haven't got just 3 stitches left, make sure all of your paired half double crochets are worked across 3 stitches, and you have those lovely chain 1 spaces in between them. So they should look like groups of 2 with a chain 1 either side. We are working a paired half double crochet across the next 2 stitches. It's a bit tight for me. There we are. We're making, oops, and a chain 1, and then we simply work 1 half double crochet into that last stitch. For me, that is the top of a chain 3 from the previous round. So you should still have a stitch count in total of 145. So you should have a total of 95 paired half double crochets, 48 chain 1 spaces, and then you've got your half double crochet at each end of your row. So the one we started with and the one at the end. Going into row 2 of our sad rows, we make a chain of 1. We are working a half double crochet into the same stitch as that chain 1. And then we are making a second half double crochet into that chain 1 space right at the end of our row. So we're working a half double crochet into that chain 1 space. We're doing the same format of our paired half doubles, working them over those 3 stitches as we did in the last row. We just need to make sure we're working them in the right place. So this is our paired half double, and that's the paired half doubles stitch just there. So we're going to work our first paired half double by yarning over, inserting our hook into the top of that paired half double stitch, which is just to the side of it. We yarn over, bring our loop up, and then we're working the second part into our chain one space. So we yarn over, insert our hook into the chain one space, bring our fifth loop up, yarn over, pull through all 5 loops, and then we're working our second paired half double crochet, beginning in the chain one space and working into the top of the next paired half double. That's our chain one, which we're going to skip, and we're working into the top of that next paired half double. So we're yarning over, inserting into our chain one space, yarning over, inserting into the top of our next paired half double, yarn over, pull through all 5 loops, and then chain one. We're then beginning our next paired half double into the top of the next paired half double from the previous row and working it into our chain one space, pull through all 5. Then we're working into our chain one space for the same and into the top of the next paired half double as the next, and chain one. So we're getting the same look of having those chain one spaces in between our paired half doubles. They're just worked in slightly different places. So working into the top of that first paired, so working into the top of the next paired half double and into that chain one space in the previous row, and then we work into the chain one space and in the top of the next paired half double, and then we chain one. Do that with you again one last time. So we begin in the next paired half double, so not here, into the next one, bring our loop up, yarn over, insert into the chain one space, yarn over, pull through all 5 loops, and then we work our next paired half double into the same, which is our chain one space, and our next paired half double, and we chain one. So we're going to repeat that all the way along, and that will take us all the way down to our last 2 stitches, and that's where I'm going to meet you. It makes that texture shift along just a little bit and really highlights those chain one spaces. So continue to work all the way across to your last 2 stitches and I'll meet you there. So once you've repeated that across all the way to your last 2 stitches, make sure you've done your chain one space. We're simply going to work 1 half double crochet into each of the last 2 stitches. So that's 1 and 2. So at the end of row 2 of your sad rows, you will have 94 paired half doubles and 47 chain one spaces. You'll also have 4 half double crochets, 2 at each end, giving you a total of 145 stitches still. Going into our final row of the sad rows, we start with a chain of 1 and turn our work, remembering that chain 1 does not count. We're then going to work a half double crochet into the same as our chain 1, work a half double crochet into the next, we're then going to work a half double crochet into the chain 1 space before working 1 half double crochet into the top of each of the next 2 paired half doubles. So there's the first one and there's the second one, and we work into our chain 1 space again, and then we're repeating this all the way across, working 1 half double crochet into each of the next 2 paired half doubles from the previous row and into that chain 1 space. So we skip the chain 1 itself, working into the top of each of the paired half doubles, that's 1 and 2, and then into that chain 1 space. We're going to repeat this all the way across to the last 2 stitches of this row, and that's where I'm going to meet you to work those last 2 stitches together. When you have just those last 2 stitches to work, we are just working 1 half double crochet into each of the next 2. So that last one's a little bit tricky to work into. and your stitch count should be 145 stitches. Do take a moment just to double check that you have the right stitch count, ready to go on to your next section when you've tracked your next 7 days. So the next few rows are the fearful rows that I'm showing you for the In the Mood blanket. These rows for those anxious weeks, those not so nice weeks. So I really hope you don't have to make this one very often, but the stitches are lovely that we're using. We begin by making a chain of 1 and then turning our work. So the special stitch for the fearful rows is the extended half double crochet, and I'm going to show you how to work that. But to make it extra special, we're also working into our 3rd loop of our stitch so that we create some flat texture for these feelings as well. We're going to start by yarning over the hook, and instead of working through our stitch as we would normally, we're actually going to pick up this front 3rd loop just underneath our stitch. The first one is always the most difficult to get. So normally we'd go through the underneath of our stitch. Instead, we're going to pick up this 3rd loop here. We're going to yarn over, bring our loop through. And with the extended half double crochet, we simply yarn over, pull through that 1st loop, and then yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. By not working through the stitch is pushed forward, giving us a really nice texture. So the front 3rd loop is running parallel to our stitch. So we'll do the next one together. We yarn over. This is our 3rd loop here. So I was to hold it straight. It is almost parallel with our stitch. So we normally go underneath our stitch, but instead we're just going to pick up this 3rd loop instead. We yarn over, bring our loop through, yarn over, just pull through that 1st loop before yarning over and pulling through all 3 loops. We're going to repeat this all the way across, picking up that front 3rd loop, bringing our loop through, yarn over, pull through just that 1st loop, yarn over and pull through all 3. On the right side of our project, you can see that it's leaving our stitches behind, but it's a really flat texture. It's not like overly fancy or anything like that. We wanted to create a stitch that, you know, highlights how we've been feeling, which is maybe a little bit worried, concerned. And I think by working into the 3rd loop, this gives us a flat texture rather than something we want to really think about. So we're yarning over, inserting into that 3rd loop, bring the loop through, yarn over, pulling through just that 1st loop before yarning over and pulling through all 3. And that's our extended half double crochet. So repeat that all the way across your row, and I will meet you for row 2. As an example, if you are needing to work your fearful rows into the top of the angry rows, you'll notice that we worked a row of double crochets in the previous row. That's the only section of the In the Mood blanket rows that ends not on a half double. So it's a little bit more difficult to find that 3rd loop, but it is there, you can see it. So in this example, we would yarn over, working into the front 3rd loop. It's just there underneath your stitch. So we're going to yarn over and pick up somehow. Oh, that's difficult. We're going to yarn over, kind of pick out that 3rd loop, yarn over, bring our loop up, pull through the 1st loop for the extended, and then yarn over, pull through all 3. And it works almost the same as if you're working it into a half double crochet. It's just a bit of a challenge to get it through that 1st loop, through the 3rd loop, should I say. So it works in the same way. You're just picking up that front 3rd loop, working your extended half double crochet the same way, just you're working it into the back of a double crochet rather than into a row of half doubles from the previous row. So just a little bit more fiddly, but not much. I just wanted to show you that in case you have worked a row of angry rows before, because they don't end on those half doubles, and it makes row 1 just that little bit trickier. But I wanted to show you the variation of working that into your double crochets. Gives you the same effect of leaving those stitches on the right side of your project, but I just wanted to show you that. You can now continue on with row 1 of your Fearful Rose, and I'll meet you at the end of row 1. Just working my final stitch, which is always a fun stitch to work into. If you can't find your stitch, just tilt it towards you. So this is actually my 3rd loop to work that last extended half double crochet. Let's give that a hand on and then work that final extended half double crochet. From the front you should be able to see your beautiful stitches from the previous row. So at the end of row 1 of your Fearful Rose, you should have a stitch count of 145 extended half double crochets. Going into row 2, we are simply going to work a row of half double crochets. So we yarn over. Because the chain 1 does not count, we work into that first stitch with our first half double crochet, and then we're working in 1 half double crochet into each stitch across to the end of our row. Continue across, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch across, and I'll meet you for row 3 of our Fearful Rose. So at the end of row 2, you should still have a stitch count of 145, just this time they are half double crochets. Going into our final Fearful row, we're going to chain 1. We're simply repeating row 1, where we're working 1 extended half double crochet into the same as our chain 1, but we're working into those front loops. That first one is always the trickiest, but we're working those extended half double crochets. That's 1. So we're working into that front 3rd loop, yarning over, bring our loop up, yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through all 3. Oops. So we're going to get another line of stitches left showing on the other side. If you need to, you can just fold your stitches out of the way to pick up just your 3rd loop. And then once you've worked a few, it does become a little bit easier to see them. And it's just kind of picking up that 3rd loop. We're going to repeat this all the way across to the end of our row. I'm not going to meet you at the end because it's very simple. We are repeating row 1 as we did before. And there you are, our stitches are starting to pop out already. You should of course have a stitch count at the end of row 3 of 145 extended half double crochets, all worked into that 3rd loop. Do double check your stitch count at the end of this row, ready to move on to your next pattern section. And I hope you have a lovely week over the next 7 days, and you don't have to make this one again for a while. So for our Joyous rows, we should of course still have that stitch count of 145 from our previous row. And the special stitch for the Joyous is the Bobble stitch, one of my absolute favourites. It's so highly textured, I absolutely love it. We're going to start by making a chain of 3. And that chain 3 counts as our first double crochet. Because that chain 3 counts as our first stitch, we're not going to work into the same. We're going to work into the next and work 1 US double crochet. We're working 1 US double crochet, the same as a UK treble crochet, into each stitch across to the end of our row. So our stitch count will still be 145 when we get to the end of the row. So work across, working 1 double crochet into each stitch, and I'll meet you at the end of row 1. So once you've worked all the way across, making 1 double crochet into each stitch across, for row 2 we start with a chain of 3. Once again, that chain 3 counts as our first double crochet of the row. We're going to start our special stitches in this row. Because that counts, we're not going to work into that first stitch. We're working our first bobble stitch into the next stitch. For our bobble stitch, we begin by yarning over, insert into the stitch, yarn over, bring a loop up, yarn over, and just pull through those first 2 loops. We're going to do that 5 times in total. So this loop here on our hook is number 1. I'm going to yarn over, insert, bring up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 for the second time, yarn over, insert, bring a loop up, yarn over, pull through 2 for the third time, yarn over, insert, bring a loop up again, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops for the fourth time, and then finally yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops for the fifth time. We should have 6 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over, pull through all 6 loops and chain 1 to secure. That closing chain 1 does not count as a stitch. Not so important here, but it will be important when we come back on row 3. Once we've worked our bobble stitch, we're going to work 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So that's 1 and 2. The bobble is viewable, or visible should I say, on the right side of our project. As you can see, it's quite bobbly and you can see all that other lovely texture from those other blanket rows as well. So we're going to repeat this all the way across, working our bobble stitch into the next. So we yarn over, insert, bring our loop up, yarn over, pull through 2, 5 times. So that was number 1. Insert, pull through 2 for the second time, 3 times, 4, and number 5. Check you have those 6 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 6 loops and close with your chain 1. So work a bobble stitch into the next, and then we work 1 double crochet into each of the next 2. This is our repeat across the whole row. We're working a bobble stitch into the next, followed by 1 double crochet into the next 2. When you get really familiar with your bobble stitches, 4 and 5, they're not that slow. You can actually move through them quite quickly. Once you've done your bobble, we're doing 1 double crochet into each of the next 2. So we're working over those 3 stitches, and that gives us that beautiful stitch. So repeat that all the way across, working your bobble stitch in the next, then 1 double crochet into each of the next 2, and I'll meet you for our last stitch. I've just reached the end of row 2, and we should end by working 1 double crochet into each of the last 2 after your last bobble. And your stitch count at the end of row 2 will be 48 bobble stitches and 97 double crochets, because we have that odd one that was our chain 3 at the beginning of our row. With row 3, we are going to work our chain of 3, which once again counts as a double crochet. So we don't work into that first stitch. Instead, we are working 1 double crochet into the top of the next stitch, followed by working a double crochet into the top of our bobble. Now, as you can see, you've got 3 stitches in the row, and this is actually the top of your bobble. That is your chain 1 next to that we're not working into. We're skipping that. So we've worked, well, in theory, worked into the top of that stitch. It looks like I missed it. So we've worked 1 double crochet into the top of the next stitch after our chain of 3, and then we're working into the top of our bobble, which could be into that chain 1, but actually it's to the side. So we're working 1 double crochet into this stitch here, so that's 1 double crochet into the top of the next 2 stitches. There we are. So we work 1 double crochet into the top of our bobble stitch, followed by 1 double crochet into each of the next 2. And that's going to give us a nice filler either side. Even though it looks like you're missing a bit, it doesn't show when you're looking at the stitches worked into them. So your stitches at the side of your bobble, just here, when you work into the top of your bobble stitch, and then we work 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. We're going to repeat this all the way across our row, all the way to our last stitch. So continue along, and I'll meet you for our final stitch that we'll work together to finish up our joyous rows for the In the Mood blanket. So once you've worked into the top of that last bobble, we just need to work into the top of our chain 3 to finish this last row of our Joyous stitches. You might find that it's flaring out a little bit for this, but your next row will correct any flaring, I promise. So at the end of your Joyous row, you should still have a stitch count of 145 stitches. Make sure you've double checked your count before you go on and track those next 7 days so that you don't have to correct them when you go on to your next rows. So you still have a stitch count of 145. For the Disgusted rows, I really hope you don't have to do these ones very much as well, but they are quite a nice row. We are starting with a chain of 1 before we turn our work, and we are then going to work 1 half double crochet into the same stitch as our chain 1, because that chain 1 does not count as a stitch. We're just going to work 1 US half double crochet into each stitch across to the end of our row. So continue along, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch along, and I will meet you for row 2. Your stitch count at the end of this row should be 145 stitches. So keep working across and I'll meet you at the end of row 1. So once you've worked 1 half double crochet into each stitch along, we're going to go into row 2 where we start that special stitch. We begin by making a chain of 4. Now this chain of 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. So that means we're going to skip not only the stitch that our chain 3 is coming out of, but also the next stitch, and we're working into the next stitch along, and we're going to be working our first 2 double crochet cluster. So we yarn over, we skip 1, skip 2, so that's the chain 3, that's the chain 1, and we're inserting our hook, yarning over, bringing a loop up, yarn over and pull through 2, and then we work the second part of our 2 double crochet cluster into the same stitch. So we yarn over, we're reinserting into that same stitch we've just worked into, yarn over, bring our loop up. So now we have 4 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over and just pull through those first 2 loops. So we just have 3 loops remaining on our hook, and then we yarn over, pull through all 3 loops, and then we're going to make a chain 1. We're then going to skip the next stitch before yarning over and working a double crochet into the next. So we skip 1, working a double crochet into the next, we chain 1, and then we're skipping the next, working a 2 double crochet cluster into the next. So we yarn over, insert, yarn over, bring our loop up, yarn over, pull through 2, we yarn over again, reinserting into the same stitch to yarn over, bring up a 4th loop. We're going to yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops before we yarn over and pull through those 3 remaining loops, and then we chain 1. We're going to skip the next, ready to work a double crochet into the next. So we yarn over, skip 1, working a double crochet into the next. We then chain 1, skip the next, working our 2 double crochet cluster into the next. So we yarn over and insert, yarn over, bring our loop up, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops, yarn over, reinsert into the same stitch, yarn over, bring our loop up, so we have 4 loops, we yarn over, pull through those first 2 before we yarn over and pull through the remaining 3 loops and chain 1. We're going to skip the next, ready to work a double crochet into the next, and then we chain 1. So this is what we're repeating all the way across. We skip the next, working our 2 double crochet into our next stitch, we chain 1, we skip the next, work our double crochet into the next, and we chain 1. It looks a little bit like that. So I like how we've got those different thicknesses. We've got the 2 double crochet cluster, a chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, 2 double crochet cluster, and in between we're skipping those stitches. So we're going to repeat that all the way across to the end of this row, and we're going to be ending our last repeat with that double crochet into that last stitch. So work across and I'll meet you for our last few stitches, and we'll make sure we work that last double crochet together. So I've just worked my final 2 double crochet cluster and made my chain 1, and you should have 2 stitches remaining, and we're just going to work 1 double crochet into that last stitch to end our final repeat. And you should be looking a little bit something like that. I hope you're loving this as much as I am. So our stitch count at the end of row 2, you should have 36 2 double crochet clusters. You should have 37 double crochets and a whopping 72 chain 1 spaces. Going into row 3, we begin with a chain of 1. Because that chain 1 does not count, we are going to be working into that first stitch, and we're simply working 1 double crochet. When we're simply working a half double crochet into each stitch and chain space along. So they worked into the top of that first stitch, working 1 half double crochet into that chain 1 space, working into the top of our 2 double crochet cluster before working into the next chain 1 space, working into the top of that double crochet. Going to work into the next chain 1 space and then into the top of that 2 double crochet cluster. We're just going to repeat this all the way along, working 1 half double crochet into each chain 1 and stitch across to the end of our row. At the end of this row, you should have a stitch count of 145. Make sure you checked that before you put your project away to carry on recording your mood for the next 7 days, so that you're ready to get started on your next pattern section for the In the Mood. Hopefully you won't have to work another row. I hope that you don't have to work another row of these Disgusted squares. Oh my God. I really hope you don't need to work another section of these Disgusted rows for a little while, but if you do, you know that I'm here for you. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. So I've just worked my final 2 double crochet cluster and made my chain 1, and you should have 2 stitches remaining, and we're just going to work 1 double crochet into that last stitch to end our final repeat. And you should be looking a little bit something like that. And you should be looking a little bit something like that. I hope you're loving this as much as I am. Going into, so our stitch count at the end of row 2, you should have 36 2 double crochet. You should have 36 2 double crochet clusters. You should have 37 double crochets and a whopping 72 chain 1 spaces. Going into row 3, we begin with a chain of 1. Because that chain 1 does not count, we are going to be working into that first stitch when we're simply working a half double crochet into each stitch and chain space along. So they worked into the top of that first stitch, working 1 half double crochet into that chain 1 space, working into the top of our 2 double crochet cluster before working into the next chain 1 space, working into the top of that double crochet. Going to work into the next chain 1 space and then into the top of that 2 double crochet cluster. We're just going to repeat this all the way along, working 1 half double crochet into each chain 1 and stitch across to the end of our row. So continue all the way along, and then I'm going to meet you for the last few stitches just so we can make sure we work into that final chain space. I don't want you to miss that one. So I've worked all the way along. I've worked into the top of my final 2 double crochet cluster. Just need to work into this chain 1 space before we work into the top of our chain, because remember we did a chain 4 at the beginning to give us this extra chain 1 space. I'm going to work into the 3rd chain that we made, so that's 1, 2, there's number 3, working our final half double crochet so that we can maintain our stitch count of 145. So for the energetic rows, we are working the special stitch of the popcorn stitch, one of my absolute favorites. I really like it because it is a bit of a weird one, because we end up working 5 stitches into the same stitch and then we get to do something rather terrifying. So for row 1, let's start there. We make a chain of 1 and we're going to turn our project. Now obviously that chain 1 does not count as a stitch, so we're going to start by working 1 half double crochet into the same stitch as our chain 1. Oops, God, I can't get that through. There we are. And then we're going to work 1 half double crochet into each stitch across. We need to make sure that we maintain our stitch count of 145 all the way across. Don't know how people do that. Okay. So once we have worked 1 half double crochet into each stitch across, we get to work our popcorn stitch for the energetic rows in row 2. We're going to start with a chain of 4, 3 and 4. So this chain 4 counts as a double crochet, which would work into our first stitch, and it counts as a chain 1. So we're going to start working into the 3rd stitch along. We're going to yarn over, and into that 3rd stitch along, we begin by making 5 double crochets all into that same stitch. So we skip the first and the next, ready to work into the next, working 5 double crochets. So that's 1. We're working number 2 all into the same stitch. There's number 3, number 4, and number 5. So we should now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 double crochets all worked into that same stitch. So far it looks a bit like a shell stitch. Once we've worked those 5 double crochets into that same stitch, we need to locate the first double crochet we made in the group. So we can count back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or we can count the posts and see that this is the first post that we worked, and that's where we're going to be inserting our hook. So we're going to bring that loop up. You'll notice I don't have my wool on my hand, and we're going to insert our hook. Now, because of the way that this texture works, we need our popcorns to show on the same side as our bobbles. Now you can change the direction that your popcorn pops by the way that you insert your hook. So in the granny square version of these rows, you insert your hook from the front to the back. But so that our popcorn can show on the right side, we're going to insert our hook from the back to the front through that 5th double crochet. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, or the first double crochet that we made. We're then going to place our loop back on our hook, secure it against our hook and bring it through, and then our popcorn shows on the right side. We're going to secure that with a chain 1, and don't worry, we're going to go through this a couple of times. So I'm going to pull my hook back out, not too much because I want to make that loop a bit bigger so I can show you again. So we have 5 double crochets and we need to insert our hook in from the back out to the front of that first double crochet in that group that we made, just underneath that stitch. And then we're going to place the loop back on our hook, bring it through, and then make a chain 1 to secure, and that puts our popcorn on the right side of our project. Now that chain 1 we made to secure our popcorn does not count, and we're going to make an additional chain 1 after that, and we're going to skip the next stitch, working a double crochet into the next. We're then going to make a chain 1, skip the next stitch, and repeat from the popcorn once again. So we skip 1 and we're working our popcorn. So we begin by making our 5 double crochets into that same stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to bring up our loop, take our hook out, insert from the back out the front through that first double crochet that we made. We're then going to place that Place that loop back onto our hook, securing it, bringing it back through, securing with a chain 1, and then we make an additional chain 1, skipping the next stitch, ready to work a double crochet into the next. And then we're going to repeat it all again. We skip the next stitch, ready to work our popcorn into the next, beginning with those 5 double crochets. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all worked into the same stitch. Bring up our loop, insert our hook from the back, out the front, through that first stitch that we made, pop the loop back onto our hook, secure it, bring it through the stitch, and chain 1. So you can see from the front how poppy those popcorns are, and by working it, inserting our hook from the back to the front, it keeps all our texture on the same side as our blanket. So we're going to repeat that all the way across, ending our last repeat. Oh, don't forget to work that extra chain 1 after your popcorn. Skip the next, and we're ending our repeat at the end of this row with our double crochet. So we're making a chain of 1, skip the next, popcorn into the next, close it with a chain 1, and then work another chain 1, skip the next stitch, and then work that double crochet into the next, and continue to repeat that all the way along to the end of your row, and I'll meet you at the end of row 2. So I'm just working my final popcorn, closing with that chain 1, making the additional chain 1, and we're ending with a double crochet into the top of that final stitch. I love how these popcorns turn out, and I like the space in between them to make them really stand out. So at the end of row 2, you should have a total of, 36 popcorns, 37 double crochets, and 72 chain 1 spaces. Going into our final row, goodness, I'm all wrapped up here. Going into our final row of the energetic rows, we're going to start with a chain of 1. That chain 1 does not count as a stitch, so we're going to yarn over and work a half double crochet into the same stitch as our chain 1. We're then going to work 1 half double crochet into the chain 1 space, half double crochet into the top of the popcorn, which is just kind of to the side of it there, followed by a half double crochet into the next chain 1 space. The next half double crochet goes into the top of the double crochet from the previous round, and then into that chain 1 space. I'm going to work into the top of that popcorn, just pulling it to the side so I can find the space we need to work into, and then we're working into the next chain 1 space. A nice easy row, just making sure we hit all those chain 1 spaces, and of course into the top of those popcorns. Remember that this chain 1 we did to close and secure our popcorn does not count. So even though this space is bigger, we're only working 1 half double crochet into it, and then 1 half double crochet into the top of that popcorn on this row. So continue across, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch and chain space across, and I'll meet you for our last few stitches of these energetic rows. So I'm just working my final half double crochet into the top. We have to remember there is a chain 1 space here because we did a chain 4 on the previous row. So work into that space before your chain, and then we're going to work our final stitch into the 3rd chain that we made. Mine's gone a bit small. I can get that on. Wow. And then we can work that final half double crochet into that last stitch. So at the end of row 3 of your energetic rows, you should have a total stitch count of 145 stitches. Now this is the last part of the video that I'm recording, so if you've reached this far, I'm very pleased you've had a very energetic week, and I really hope that you're enjoying making your In the Mood blanket. Don't forget to snap a picture and show me your progress for your very own In the Mood blanket. I'm off to rip most of this out so I can actually work on my real blanket, but I hope you've enjoyed these tutorials and they're hoping you master all these wonderful stitches. Thank you for joining me. I will see you in the next video.